Well, Mike and Hayley Jones were the average American family with 2 kids of their own, going to church, working hard to make ends meet, when God rather dramatically interrupted their lives, challenging them to take a huge step of faith in international adoption of not 1 child, not 2, but 8 orphan siblings. They're here today to tell us the incredible story of the Jones dozen. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to have you guys. And you already had 2 kids, so I'm just trying to imagine you with 10 children, and that is just a distraction. But, really it started with you, Mike. You guys had those kids, and since you were young, you always dreamed of adopting a child from Africa. And so how did this 8 come about?
Well, I don't think anybody ever starts out saying, let's go adopt 8 children, but God had placed that seed in my heart from an early age that I would adopt a son from Africa, and I didn't know what country that would be. But throughout the process, when we got into the adoption, we talked and prayed and seek God's face about what he wanted us to do. And so he kept telling us to think and do more, and we didn't know what more was. And so we didn't know if it was 2 or 3 children or what, but just, through divine intervention and a prayer and encounter with God, seeking his face and saying, I can't do this anymore, or what am I supposed to do? He led us to the 8.
I like your story because you're looking at the 2 or 3 thinking that was more, like that's a lot, And you said, what are those pictures over there? And she said, oh, those are like larger groups, 6 or 8. And when she said 8, it just went into your heart. Mm-hmm. And you were just struggling, trying to negotiate God down, right? Like, okay, what if I did 4? Like 4 would be a lot. What was that moment that you said, okay, finally to the 8? What happened?
Well, being miserable for a couple weeks and, not knowing what fasting was, and I was just eating up with it. I mean, if I had a spare moment in the truck, I was praying to God, like, well, what am I supposed to do? I can't do 8, I'll do the 4. And so it was one night when we put the kids to bed that Hayley was in the shower, and I said, I just got on my knees and said, I got to get serious about this. And so I was on the side of the bed and just praying to God, what am I going to do? I just can't do the 8. And so I became face down on the floor in front of the wall. And I was like a little child trying to grab hold of the dad's legs. And I couldn't see anything above God's knee, but I was just grabbing hold of him. And I just said, I cannot do this. I'll do the 4, I'll do anything you ask. And all he simply said was, I can take care of twice as many, and this is what you must do. And so, because I was sitting there saying, I'll do the 4, God. And so that's when, from there on, we never questioned it or looked back and knew what God was telling us to do. No matter how hard the journey got, we knew that God was going to see us through it.
And I love, this is your book, by the way, At Any Cost, which tells this story. And I love what Hayley says in this book, that God had to start with you, because if she came to you and said 8 children, that would not have gone over well. But what was it like when when he came to you and said, God spoke to me and we're supposed to adopt 8 children?
Mm-hmm. We had been praying together so much about what exactly does God want us to do, and how is exactly he going to lead us. And when we met with the organization and they're talking to us about children that they have there, and they're showing us pictures and just giving us all this information, and I go home that day and I just start feeling really sick. There's something just in the pit of my stomach. It just didn't feel right. And I kind of just started praying. I said, God, who do I think I am to pick a child? That's what I felt like I was trying to do. And I said, I can't do that. So I said, God, if you want me to adopt a child, then you're going to tell me which one. And then I didn't look at their pictures anymore. I just kind of closed my computer and I was done. And so it was about a week and a half or 2 weeks later when he came to me and told me kind of what all has been happening in his prayer life. And when he said, it's the 8, God told me it was the 8. And I said, well, I've just been waiting for that. I knew God was going to give us an answer and tell us something for sure. So it was just a peace about it. And this is so far from who he was that I knew God has really broken him and changed him. And I could see that. And so we ran with it.
And Mike, you got choked up there. She said she never had seen you cry in her marriage until this happened, and God really broke your heart.
He did, for sure. I mean, I cry at the drop of a hat, and especially just talking about my kids.
Yeah, anytime it comes to his kids now, God's really changed him.
Do you cry because you have 10 children? Or really, because
no, it's a joyful cry because God's done so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of your big concerns was money, right? I mean, you guys were struggling to get by with 2 children, and then the thought of 10, like, how have you done that?
We have definitely learned the difference between needs and wants, and we've always had what we've needed, and sometimes it's just like manna from heaven. Like, we have no idea really where it comes in, and he'll sit down, and he's always been the big budgeter, so he'll work on a budget, and he kind of has to put it away because it never adds up. Like, it doesn't. But it always comes in at the right time. And I've been in the store, and hadn't even had all the kids with me, maybe just a couple of children, and people have come up to me and said, I feel like I'm supposed to give you this, and it may be a gift card, or just, something completely random. And it's just God's kind of confirmations along the way that we're doing the right thing, and that's been huge.
Yeah, somebody one time was gonna give us some beef, and our freezer died like the weekend before they were gonna bring it to the house, and we didn't tell anybody about it, and we're like, what are we gonna do? We don't have a freezer now.
Yeah.
And somebody called me, and I about dropped the phone. It was a Monday morning, and it was an appliance store in the Nashville area, and was like, somebody's bought you a freezer, and we just need you to pick out which one you want.
Yeah.
And it was like, what?
Yeah.
How did you know that?
Yeah, so how did
Yeah.
anyone know that? So it's just been amazing to see all the blessings that God's done along the way, just because we stepped out in faith. Because we certainly were not equipped for this or felt prepared. And I don't know why God chose us for this. And I always say maybe it's because we were crazy enough to say yes. But now we get to experience all these blessings along the way that we would have never got to experience.
Yeah, it's confirmation.
And I think, the adoption process and your international adoption process, I think is similar. Like a lot of people, there's a lot of struggle in that. It took you 3 years. So in that faith journey, I think maybe probably prepared you for this. Tell me a little bit about those 3 really tough years.
Yes, it was just kind of a heartbreaking 3 years. At the time of when we started our adoption, Sierra Leone was a closed country. So they weren't even doing adoptions. So it's kind of like God tells us, here's the children, here's where you're going, but by the way, we're not processing adoptions. So us and just a few families just spent months over there. I mean, I was over there in Sierra Leone months at a time. Then I would come home to Tennessee, where we're from, months at a time, and just be traveling back and forth, just meeting with whoever would listen to me. And being a third world country, there were government officials in and out all the time. So you would start working with one, and then they would go out of office, and somebody else would come in, and you're starting all over again at square one. We had 3 different attorneys. And just during those visits, each time you had to leave your children in an orphanage in a third world country. And so it was just a very dark time for us, and especially me, because no matter where I was, I had children in a different part of the world, and I couldn't take care of them. So if I was at home with Tyler and Tucker, my biological 2, I had 8 other children with no one. And so it was such a struggle, but looking back on it now, I can see that the blessing in that was just the relationship that we were able to build with the kids in Sierra Leone before they came home. That time, God definitely used that time to help make us stronger. So we were mom and dad way before the children came home, and they got to see somebody fight for them. They got to experience that and see how much somebody's not going to give up on them and love them and get through them. And it made the joy of them coming home that much sweeter.
I bet, I do a lot of work in the developing world, and, they get disappointed a lot. People there get disappointed a lot by people who make emotional promises or optimistic promises, even out of a good heart, but can't fulfill them, and then they get let down. And I'm sure every time you left, they must have wondered, is mom coming back, or is dad? You went there as well a number of times. What do you think those 3 years did for you, Mike?
It prepared our hearts, and we became mom and dad, like she said, way before they ever came home. And so whether it was through Skyping them every weekend or writing them letters, we were building those bonds, and I had a little bit of Noah experience. I mean, we had a modest little ranch home that had a basement, and so I was just working away. We didn't know when they were going to come home, but we had to build a couple of more bedrooms and work through our county and stuff of what we had to do to modify our home. So we were busy at work. We never knew the next trip whether they were going to just come on home. So
I think when I was younger, I used to think this idea about following God, like if you're doing what God says, everything's going to go well for you, and it's going to be just like this fairy tale. You guys adopted 8 children, now you have 10, and you live this magical Walt Disney kind of life. So coming home with 8 children from Africa, totally different culture, bringing them into your family, what was that first year like?
There was a lot of transition. You're right, you have 2 different cultures. And everybody has their own ideas and expectations of what that should look like. And then you have language barriers, and they could speak some English, but as far as descriptive words or sharing emotions or feelings, they didn't know those words in English. So you had to learn all that, and just the whole process of becoming a family, and everything was new to them. Lawnmowers were new to them. Can openers were new to them, just every little thing. So there was so much to experience and a lot of adventures. And it was definitely entertaining, for sure.
So let me ask you honestly now, you know, it's been a number of years. You've been making meals for an astronomical number of people and laundry and all of that. Any regrets?
No.
Oh, no.
None at all. The blessing is far outweighed the lack of sleep or the busyness, for sure.
You know, one of the things I think is so unique about the two of you, and you know, we have stories like this from time to time, for sure, on this program. You know, a lot of us give our lives to God, and then we say we give our lives to God, but really what we mean is we want to go to heaven, and we're happy to have His blessing, but we don't really want to go that extra mile and say, like, my whole life is yours, and whatever you say, I'm going to do, no matter how crazy it is. And you know, during those 3 years when you were struggling to get those kids home, people had a hard enough time swallowing that God spoke to you to adopt 8 children. But then when it wasn't happening, they were saying, well, obviously God's not in this because it's hard. Well, what would you say to that? Because sometimes people do take that step of faith and then it doesn't all happen the way they think.
Yeah, and that's part of our message to people. I mean, just because God tells you to do something doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And so he will give you every tool that you need to get through it. And that's what we've learned through this process, and that's what we encourage other people to do too. You know, no matter who you are, or what background you may come from, or how inadequate you may feel, I can't do that. You know, maybe the book will give them the courage to go back and pick up where they fell short.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when he asks you to do things, it doesn't make sense too. You know what I mean? Like, that never made sense to your mind. You're like, well, people thought you guys have a lot of money, so you could adopt 8 children, but actually you were struggling to care for 2.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? Like, how do you wrap your head around those things that God thinks in a completely different way than us?
It's definitely just stepping out on faith. And when we first started the process, I used to pray every night that God would give me faith that's immeasurable and immovable. And then I kind of laughed at the end. I'm thinking, okay, he gave me every day a chance to exercise that faith that would just be immeasurable and immovable. And there's so much you learn about yourself along the way. And we never expected for it to be as long and as hard of a process as it was. But then now the blessings that we get are so much more on top of that. So if you can just hang on and hang in there, God will see you through. And it probably won't be your timing, but His timing is better, and His timing is always perfect.
And you know, you always get these kinds of things in retrospect, right? Like, when you're going through it, you were so honest about some of those dark times, but it's only when we look back that we kind of go, oh, now I kind of see what you were up to,
So it's
right?
good to see people on the other side of things, because it kind of helps you hang on a little bit and gives you hope.
Oh, well, there's so much more we could talk about your phenomenal book, but I think people just need to get it, don't you?
Yes.
At any cost, Adopting 8 Orphans. Thank you so much. I just loved your honesty and so inspired by your story.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
having
so
us.
much. We appreciate it.
Yeah, and if you've been watching this and, you know, maybe God's been challenging you with something that just doesn't quite make sense or add up, like in Mike's budget line, you know, I just want to encourage you today, hearing this story or even getting this book, just to think about, you know, the fact that it is through God's strength and His provision and His way of doing things that He can make those things happen. Maybe today is the day that you need to take a step of faith. Something to think about.